Hey, this is Johnny. I'm here with Elizabeth Frost and Tracy Hollister. They're here to share about a recent interaction they had with the CDC resignees, three of them, and including the big-time Satanist Dimitri. Elizabeth, why don't you start with for us? How did it go? Why don't you summarize a little bit?
Yeah, so I think Tracy and Aaron and Travis and I all came into this conversation really interested in, what the angle was going to be and, what level of organization were we going to pick up on between, these folks. Obviously, anytime you have people resigning in tandem and being clapped out, it's going to feel a little coordinated, right? So that's what we wanted to talk about, and I think we had some really interesting conversations. There was some interesting things that I picked up on, that Tracy picked up on. The cool thing about having four of us in this conversation together is I think we all maybe picked up on and zeroed out different things. So it was quite the experience. I will say that Satanism didn't come up during this conversation. I don't have any tea to spill there, but I will say that they said a lot of things that didn't seem to align, with what we were hearing from Secretary Kennedy. The very next day after recording this. So I think it calls into question a lot of the things that we heard from the folks who joined us on the call.
Yeah, I was impressed with how cordial everybody was and respectful, and I thought a lot of great points were brought up by everybody, and yeah, especially you, Tracy. You had some zingers there. How do you think everything went?
Oh, thank you, and I appreciate you pointing out any zingers. Um, it was the first time I participated in one of these "Why Should I Trust You" calls, and Elizabeth has done. I think this is her seventh. So I had some reservations going into the call, and just to give the high level for the viewers. We had a 2-hour conversation, and it was three types of people on the call. There were four moderators from Why Should I Trust You podcast. From what I can tell, all four of them are aligned with mainstream media and mainstream establishment public health. So going into it, my sense was that their sympathies were more with the CDC directors as opposed to the people who suffered from the CDC directors' poor decisions, non-scientific based decisions. So kids who were masked, people who lost their lives, people who lost their from the COVID shots, people who lost their jobs for not taking an experimental mRNA injection. So there was a huge amount of pain that these people caused. And going into the call, I felt that I was being asked to express empathy. So, in fact, one of the hosts reached out to me and they said, do what you want to do, but it would be nice, given that this is so fresh, if you could express empathy for the shooting situation and the job loss. And I do have empathy for the shooting. I mean, that would have been very stressful and traumatic to go through. Then again, it was not at all Kennedy's fault. So people have been damaged by the shot. The shooter felt that he was damaged from the shot. There would be natural hostility toward the organization that pushed mandates and pushed people to take the shot. So really, I see Kennedy here as really the messenger of reality, the messenger of the people. And I think that it was inappropriate so that it started with, in the first 2 hours, it was kicked off by a video played of Kennedy saying basically like the CDC is really troubled and there's a lot of problems and people need to be let go. We need to resuscitate it. So they asked what we thought about it. And Dmitry Daskalakis said all he could do was say, to be honest, I just went to trauma. And he was thinking about the shooter situation. So he was linking that with Kennedy, which I think is a media strategy, but I don't think it's the right linkage. And then I went next and I just said, it's a man of integrity speaking the truth about an agency that needs a lot of reform and needs a lot of accountability. So the way that it worked was Brenda was the main host and then Tom. And Brenda came from ABC News. And part of the reason I participated is because Elizabeth and Travis and Aaron had all participated before. And they all said they had good experiences with Brenda. And I have had good experiences with her. But at that point, I knew her just about a week. So I was relying on my Maha friends to say this is legit. And the best thing about the podcast was that the four of us Maha people got to speak, and we were not buying the spin. None of us, I think, were buying the spin. I think we were challenging, and we were polite, we were respectful, we stood our ground. But the way that it flowed was Brenda would call on different people. And if somebody wanted to respond to someone's point, they had to put that in the chat. Hey, I wouldn't really want to respond to what Dan Jernigan said or Deb Oury. And so it was a lot of turn taking. And sometimes we Maha people would ask a question toward the end of what we said, because we had a lot of questions for them. But it was really moderated if and only if our questions were accepted by the hosts, would they then move the conversation along. And it looks like we got someone from Ohio joining us, so probably one of Elizabeth's people.
Hi, Brandon.
So, I was reflecting on it afterwards, and I was saying I had all these questions that I wanted to ask. And some people said, well, why didn't you ask them? And it was like, well, we didn't have the control. And they said, well, who did? And I said, well, it was the four moderators who had control over the questions. So overall, it was interesting. But with 7 people on the call with 4 hosts, you can only go so deep in any topic area. And a lack of depth plays more to the health establishment. It plays more to sound bites as opposed to getting deeper on a subject, like what a kerfuffle the VAERS database was and keeping track of real numbers on COVID deaths. And, the extent of vaccine ideology and people not paying attention to injuries and deaths and just focusing on the benefits of the shots, which is just not at all scientific. But those are some of my thoughts.
Safe and effective, Tracy. Safe and effective. That's what I've heard. I don't know. Yeah. I just keep going back to 1986. So as I understand it, the whole vaccine industry is going to shut down because, in their own words, vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. So I don't know where safe and effective. How do they get there with that? And yeah, like you said, without studies, or they want to hide the studies for 75 years. The Pfizer papers, what their studies show is just incredibly concerning. You talk about the VAERS data, right? Their own studies show it doesn't capture 1% of the injuries that would implicate that we have like what 1.7 million deaths in America alone from the COVID vaccine. Yeah, really wild. So I'm curious though, what's one question that you would want to ask Dimitri if you or any of the other panelists if you had the opportunity?
I know what question Tracy wanted to ask Dimitri.
Yeah, I had a question prepared, and it went like this. We're all the authority on our own intentions. And all over X, there are pictures of you, as you know, Dimitri, wearing inverted pentagrams, the Satanist symbol. So please tell us what wearing those meant to you. What are your beliefs around Satanism? How did that impact your role in public health? And how do you think that influences your trustability when it comes to mothers taking your advice about putting shots in their children? That was my question. But it didn't seem to go with the flow of the conversation because we were always reacting to a question someone else had or a question of the host. So we were always responding. And like I said, we had limited ability. And for me, I feel like if I had asked that question, some people would have pounced on me and protected him from answering it. But I think it's a highly relevant question. And actually, I was going to couch it in this podcast is about being bold and being honest and talking about why should we trust you. So it is in keeping with the podcast, but I felt that it was, hey, there's Aaron.
Hey guys, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. We were just, Johnny just asked, what question would I have asked Dimitri? So I went into the question about explaining the Satanist gear that he wore.
Yeah.
Couple hats, tattoo, couple shirts, the floor in one setting, and it was on his Instagram account, his own Instagram account. So I don't know that if he has that belief system now, but it is relevant and it is something worthy of exploring. So it was too bad that I couldn't answer that. And Aaron, I was just saying that it felt like it would have been taking a massive turn in the conversation to bring that up, because the whole flow of the conversation was responding backwards to questions before or what other people said. And that was just
Tracy, you got to learn this politician pivot, just
I know.
yeah, and then
I know.
on message, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting deal. Like it was civil, which was great, and I think that's an important aspect of trying to win people over is to try to be civil. And I think, you weren't. It's in any conversation like this, you're starting from a premise of belief, which is really hard to just unwind without any relationship. And so, for a first conversation, it's not bad.
Okay. Well, good. Well, and I wonder if there is going to be a second conversation. I know Elizabeth said she wouldn't be surprised if there was a part 2. Has anyone heard what's happening next?
I've actually heard from Dimitri myself, and he's interested in having another conversation. It's hard to know what that motivation is. I'm not going to speculate or guess as to why, but I'm always open for a conversation. So
okay, did he emailed you, or how did he reach out?
He emailed me.
And was he looking for a private conversation or another part 2?
Potentially another part to the whole conversation. I think that was part of his motive. I had just written to everybody and said, hey, thanks for participating today and appreciate, I kind of individually messaged them and said, thanks for participating. And since we had their emails and he wrote right back, said it was a great conversation, was appreciative of the chance to talk. And so, I'll always listen when somebody wants to talk.
Was this guy, Dimitri, was this the guy who was kind of not letting us get the data from the CDC that Kennedy wanted? Or was that somebody else?
So I want to clear something up. So I know Kennedy went on Fox News and he was talking about a guy, but I believe he was talking about Dimitri in one case and Dan Jernigan in the other case. So Dan Jernigan is, throughout the podcast, they kept pointing to him as the safety data guy. So he was associated with VAERS and I think the data link and getting requests from Kennedy. So I think when Secretary Kennedy was saying that this request was dragged out for 7 months, I think that would have been in Dan Jernigan's arena. And the Texas delay on the money, which it sounded like, so the Secretary Kennedy was saying that there was about, I don't know, a 30-day delay on getting the money over to Texas for the measles outbreak. And that might have been where he was referring to Dimitri Daskalakis. But I think that the two comments were about two different people. Because now I've noticed a conflating of the two of them on X, where people are thinking the guy that has the Satanist symbols is the guy that delayed on the VAERS data and all the data supply, but that was Dan Jernigan.
Right on, right on. Yeah, good to know. So, I saw something else that this guy had received 17 interviews for the morning news for the weekends since his resignation, which was what, like 2 weeks ago? Does that sound right? I just can't.
It
I don't know.
was August 28th, so it would have been almost 2 weeks ago.
And that's probably right. He's been around a lot. I mean, I think they're making their rounds. I think that's that's kind of politics land. People, once there's kind of controversy, that's what sells best for advertisers on the old dinosaur news. And so he's a controversial figure for a lot of people, including, saying he doesn't want to be there. So I think, and he's a talkative guy. He's very friendly. So I think there's that aspect that he's a charming person in terms of his performance or, ability to be carry a conversation, which I think is really good. I think that's why media likes him, is because he has an ability to carry a conversation. He definitely talked the most of all the people that were on the call, and I think that was an aspect of kind of why a lot of these interviews have happened.
Yeah, and I want to share my thought too, is that there was a lot of coordination. Like Elizabeth said at the beginning of our conversation, there had to be a great deal of coordination, the timing when they left. I'm not buying that the crowd that cheered, clapped them out was all organic. I think in this day and age, we have to be aware that people get paid for appearances. And I think that when there's so much pharma funding in the news and the news media was carrying the message. So there was a coordination of messaging around COVID. So there was not only the PR agency that was the same for Moderna and Pfizer and the CDC, but the mainstream media is all in sync on the messaging, safe and effective, no coverage of vaccine deaths, only coverage of with and from COVID deaths, without any critical thinking that with COVID is not from COVID. And so in the end, I felt a little bit uncomfortable with being a part of another stop on their tour, their friendly media tour. And the only difference was we were there to counter it, and we were there so that was good. That was the only unique part of it was the Maha presence.
I think what made me okay with it, Tracy, I think is like knowing that this media tour is happening with or without us, and that at least we got to provide pushback, when we were called on, which kind of restricted our ability to push back on things that I know we probably would have otherwise. But Yeah, I think was how I made peace with it.
Right. Yeah.
That reminds me a little bit. Somebody made the comment that maybe Kennedy shouldn't have showed up this last week to the Senate hearing, that, he's going to kind of going into the dragon's den and they're going to twist all of his words against him and they're just after their sound bites. But, I think my point would be, hey, you got to go and you got to speak the truth. We got truths that are being suppressed. And you got to just keep speaking the truth and let the chips fall where they may. So.
Yeah, and I was glad that Brenda had asked all four of us to weigh in on the new piece of information that came out of the hearing the day after we filmed the podcast. So on Thursday, September 4th, the new piece of information was Secretary Kennedy's view of the Manaras firing, which was different from what she had shared with the 3 CDC people who just parroted it as if that was the truth. And she had twisted it to say that Kennedy was wanting her to approve the ACIP recommendations, the immunization practice recommendations, prior to seeing the data or getting the recommendations. And he clarified that he didn't want her to commit to not signing it, and so in that conversation, in that context, he would have had a reason to believe that she was predisposed to not sign off on it, which would have shown an ideological bias that we see throughout the CDC, which is that they're like vaccine cheerleaders, or things that are inappropriately named vaccines, like the mRNA shot, are just cheerleaded and not treated in terms of here's the cost and here's the benefits and here's the data. It's not at all equal.
Tracy, you talk about what should be called vaccines. So in Aaron's series, closing remarks today about vaccines, I loved what he said. He said a vaccine to him going forward, his definition is any product that's so dangerous it needs a liability shield. It needs indemnity. So I thought that was pretty powerful.
Wow.
Yeah, something along the lines of why should I trust you, that came about from, I believe, my second appearance on the podcast, which was kind of another weird group of Maha and established public health folks. One of the guests was Paul Offit, and a member of my Maha Ohio team had a really great question, just locked airtight, with facts about the differences between the COVID shot and a vaccine. And much to my surprise, everyone can hear for themselves in that second Maha public health conversation, but we hear Paul Offit admit that maybe they shouldn't have called that a vaccine. And so, and where's the media frenzy about that? I certainly didn't see the press outrage at Paul Offit for making those comments.
I think that they would wish that he didn't say it, so they didn't want to attract attention to it. In my view, it was no more than a clever marketing stunt to call it a vaccine, because vaccines had a history. Polio, smallpox, there had been a long time development, for better or worse, in the public's mind about trusting things called vaccines. So if they had been honest, saying this is an mRNA gene therapy, it's never been before used in a vaccine, it wasn't tested for reducing the transmission, it was tested for reducing the severity of the illness. Therefore, it was always an individual choice. It should not have been mandated anywhere, because as we saw, like if we had asked on the call, and this is one of the other questions I would have liked to ask, if we had asked, show of hands, out of all 11 of us here, the 4 hosts, the 3 CDC people, the 4 Maha people, how many of us know people in our lives who got the COVID shot and then got COVID some point after? It would have been 11 out of 11. If we had asked, how many of you know, I'm going to a controversial place here. How many of you know a pregnant man? The answer would have been 0. And I'm going to Dimitri's comment and insisting in his resignation note to call pregnant people, which, of course, is ideological. It's not. I learned over the years as a former liberal that there's a difference between political correctness and actual correctness, and you shouldn't confuse the two. And so when he was referring to pregnant people a couple of times, and I saw him in a news interview where he kind of doubled down on it, and he signed off he, him, with his pronouns. So it's another indication that science and facts and observations are not they are not the primary drivers of the behaviors of people at the CDC, that they're paying attention to other things. What do y'all think of that pregnant people remark?
Yeah, I think that reminds me of, something that I would have loved to have asked when we got onto the medical freedom subject, if, I had the opportunity or felt it would have been productive, because maybe not. But, when I think of medical freedom, and how, modern liberalism is at odds with the medical freedom community, I think back on all of the arguments I've heard on, pro-choice arguments about, I don't want the government legislating my body, or I don't trust the people in Washington to know what's best for me or my body. And you could almost, cut and paste, I don't want the government making decisions about my vaccine with, the medical products that are injected into me, with, I don't want the government making decisions, about my uterus or my reproductive health. And it's just always baffled me how, this new age of liberalism is so insensitive to medical freedom, given that the argument is fundamentally the same.
Yeah, my body, my choice.
Yeah.
Coming back to pregnant people, it's just, I think it's like the litmus test. You kind of have to suspend everything about everything to be true, and you're just going along with the propaganda that you're told to. And I think that this is like, hey, if you're willing to go to this far, it's really concerning. How are we going to wake people up out of this cult when people are, really publicly declaring they believe in what most of us would regard as the height of absurdity?
Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this, and I just don't know that you're ever going to truly get past it, is that you have a whole segment of our population that just cannot get past the idea of Donald Trump as president. And I think that's just a real thing. I mean, I just think that whatever he touches is poison to them. And I think that's part of this. Kennedy's part of that to so many of these people, that he just, no matter what ideas might be there or might be good, the politics around it are, there's a like a virtue signal associated with it that you have to live in order to kind of stay within the good graces of the people that you have already, you've got your whole social life around it. I think about these people, like their entire world has been associated with government and Washington and the Washington culture. And yeah, they might be in Atlanta, but there's a culture associated with that. And I just think there is too much for some of these people to overcome, because it will mean a disassociation with friends and family and their circle and their good graces in their next job. And Trump is just, and anything associated with Trump, whether it's Kennedy or whatever else, it's just too far for them to go. And so they kind of have to do this. They kind of have to play into this space, even if at moments Dmitry sort of leaned into things that I think he probably fundamentally thinks, which is that medical freedom might be a right choice. It might be a good thing. He probably can't get all the way there because this is going to be associated with him saying that Trump is okay. And I just don't think many of these people can say that. And I think they're not going to be allowed to say that in their circle.
Yes.
All right, Aaron, to your point, real quick about the TDS and everything that Trump touches or associated with Trump, they got to stay away from. What is the deal? How can they be all about Project Warp Speed and about this vaccine? They're taking this vaccine as a protest to Kennedy, and this is Trump's vaccine, right? So many were saying, "Hey, we're not going to take this," yet they're still just over the moon. The mental gymnastics. I don't know. It's the power of the propaganda. They are just experts, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, I think people just you will intellectually suspend anything necessary. You think about, I mean, it is truly like a religious aspect of this. If I think about diehard evangelicals and you start to sort of have a conversation about a deeper meaning about Jesus or something like that, and or that you confront that same person with that Jesus doesn't potentially exist, which that's not what I think, but that's certainly, you know, if they were confronted with the same thing, the reaction would be similar. You would jump through whatever hoop necessary in order to sort of say, because it's too deconstructive of everything underneath you. And if you allow it to deconstruct all of that, then everything else kind of becomes, you lose all bearings. And I think that's just really what this is for so many people. And I don't necessarily fault anybody. I don't even look at that and say like you're an evil person for having that belief. This is the education system they've gone through. This is the culture they've been surrounded in. This is the workforce that they've been surrounded in. Everyone around them says that what they're doing is the right thing. So if all of a sudden somebody comes along and says, actually, what you're doing is really broken, I'm not sure they can just get there. I'm not just sure that they can just be like, cool, yeah, you're right. 50 years of my life has been wasted. People don't go there. They can't do it. And I think that Trump exacerbates it and illustrates it, kind of shines a spotlight on it. But I'm not sure this is anything more than just, look, we're just fundamentally coming from a different place. And that place has been reinforced by an ideology, by almost a religious zealotry that you can't just undo.
Well said. Yeah, it's evident to me that there's some kind of culture and echo chamber within the CDC that is self-reinforcing. And I also felt that the resignations of these 3 CDC people, well, it was definitely weaponized against Kennedy, but I felt that there was an inversion of the truth. So clearly Kennedy, in observing the CDC over years and including writing about them in his very well documented books like The Real Anthony Fauci or The Wuhan Cover-Up, I mean, he's been a student of these agencies in a lot of his lawsuits. So I trust that he's observing them correctly. Oh, and hey, Brenda's there. Okay, good. Brenda's listening in.
Send her a link.
Well, she's able to watch it. I mean, yeah. So anyway, great. Glad you're watching, Brenda. Yeah, I'm just saying that I think that there's an echo chamber within the CDC, but also that the resignations of these 3 CDC people, it felt like there was I want to say it's like the pot calling the kettle black, but it was just a reverse accusation. So what Kennedy is saying is, in not talking to these 3 CDC people, he's got his own inside people into the CDC, whether it be the whistleblower, Thompson, other people that he knows. He's got his own sources of who he trusts. And clearly he doesn't trust these three people because they were not briefing him. So what I got authentically was that their feelings were hurt, that he hadn't asked them their opinion. But clearly there was already a decision that he made not to trust them based on who they were, what they've said, what they've done before. But so when they were saying, "Oh, I'm concerned that he's making it political and he's making this not data driven," those were what I consider to be real accusations laid firmly at the feet of the CDC people who were responsible and weren't taking responsibility for the horrible decisions that resulted in so much death and suffering that far outweighed any pain that the three of them are going through. And so there was this, "You're accusing us, we're going to accuse you." And that, I think, didn't quite come out clearly in the podcast, that there was a deflection of responsibility and a counter accusation that I don't think should have appropriately been laid at Secretary Kennedy's feet.
Yeah, I think that speaks a bit to what I was saying before, though. Like, I don't know that you're going to, in a situation like that, I think everybody's kind of walking into that room. Maybe not the CDC folks, because I think there's probably enough confidence, as they've been kind of going around on media, and supportiveness within media and sort of friendly audiences, that kind of walking into that, I'm not sure anybody was like ready to go toe to toe and have a bunch of guns a-blazing kind of thing. And I think, that it speaks to this idea. And again, just kind of like 30,000 foot view, how do you start these conversations with people who are diametrically opposed to one another in what they think about the successes or failures of something? I have a feeling if you asked any one of those people if they did a good job during COVID, they'd all say they did. So it's really hard to then confront someone and say, "But you didn't, and you didn't pull that off," and that's just a hard place to start a conversation from. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't have it, but I think you have to have multiple layers of that conversation to be able to say, is there any chance that you can admit some failure? And they can ask the same of us. Is there any chance that you just got dogmatic about everything because everything we said was wrong? Or you saw everything that we said as wrong? And there's probably some admonition of that on our side too, of look, once it got tainted by CDC or NIH or FDA, I was like, I'm not listening to anything these people have to say, even if there was maybe some advice in it that might have been, at least a discussion starter place. I wasn't willing to talk to any of it. And I think that's because I was so hurt and frustrated by the entire situation and scenario. So I don't know how you get from where we are to where you might want to be. But, we've spent the last 30 years at least sort of yelling at each other in a crossfire format, and we're way worse than we were. So I don't know that that's the answer either.
It's the other side. It's like a cult, right? That's what it seems like. You've got these beliefs that are just, they're just religious in nature. Vaccines are safe and effective. I can't get over how, not too long ago, Democrats were, had the utmost skepticism of the likes of Big Pharma, and now we have going on where, just take the shot. It's safe. It's safe. It's safe. I mean, we had the opioid epidemic just destroying communities, Vioxx, on and on and on, one scandal after the other. And look, we got Brenda. Welcome.
You guys caught me. I was like, should I do this? I feel like maybe it's better without me. Hi, everybody.
What's going on?
Hey, hey.
Hi,
It's so
Brenda.
nice to meet you, Johnny. And it's really good to Tracy and I are just getting to know each other, but I feel like Elizabeth and Aaron and I chat with these guys a lot. It's really good to be here.
You had me on one of your episodes way back when about there was a massive panel just like this last one. So yeah, I could but yeah, it was a great show you got going. Lively debate and yeah, we're just talking about how this conversation's so important.
Yeah, well, listen, I know it was really good to hear some of your feedback, Tracy. I know it's weird. It's a weird format. I can understand why it might be kind of like uncomfortable, and you know, in many ways I'm sure people feel like they didn't get to say exactly what they wanted to say. It's like we're still, you know, I'm kind of proud, especially with Elizabeth. She's been my road dog since the beginning. She's done every single one of them with me, and you know, the whole idea is to see if we can even get people who maybe don't agree to even just be in the same space together and talk. And I know that seems real basic, but like that's really at the end of it my like very first goal. You know, it's interesting. Tracy was talking about how some of us have been in mainstream media and stuff, and I wanted to just address that a little bit because you know she's right. I used to work at ABC News and CBS News, and I did all these things, and you know, I left mainstream media just very recently, and you know, it's really interesting because I've been in that business for so long. I have a lot of just experience and insights into what that experience was like. And there's a lot about it that I'm really ready to leave behind. And I think that's why I am doing this experience. I am doing this podcast because I'm able to say things and I'm able to just like be myself in a way. These guys know I have a cursing problem. Like I can't do that when I worked at network news. But all that to say that like, you know, it's hard, I think, for any of us to leave our biases behind and just be like blank slates. And so I try to be as honest as I can, even with some of these guys when we're just chatting, like they know a lot about me, right, Aaron? And Elizabeth,
Absolutely.
I tell you guys a lot, you know, and partly it's because I don't want to feel like I'm hiding something, but I also know the risk of that is people feeling as though I may have like a dog in this fight, you know? So I get that. I really do. I don't know what the answer is to that other than just being myself, you know? But so I would just say that you're right. I do come from that experience, but I don't know, Tracy, that I feel like I like that it defines me right now as much as maybe it may appear that way if you like look at my resume or something, that like how could she not, because she worked here for 12 years and here for 6 years. But I think the more you get to know me, the more you might see, and maybe we can engage in conversations about what it's like to work in mainstream media, that there's a lot of skills I learned, but there's a lot of groupthink that I'm really ready to leave behind, and there's a lot of constrictions and constraints that I'm ready to leave behind. So I don't recognize myself in the idea that it like is a bias that affects how I ask questions. But I'm also really open to that. If y'all are like, it does, I want to reflect on that, you know?
Tracy, are you?
Tracy, your mic.
Muted, I
Yeah,
think.
you got you
Oh, yes,
muted.
yes.
Love it.
Hey, I appreciate that. And I'm curious what sort of groupthink as it relates to public health is endemic to, say, ABC. I'm curious about that, and so I'll just leave it there because that's a big enough question.
Well, you know, so I left ABC well before the pandemic, and I was at CBS during the pandemic. And
Oh.
you know, I'm not sure that I'd say it was groupthink necessarily, specifically pandemic related. Look, I live in New York City. My experience was, you know, like, and this may be a little bit controversial for me to say this on this forum, but like it was really tough during that time, and we had like trucks with body bags, and I knew people who died from COVID. We can talk about with COVID or from COVID or whatever, but I like went drinking with one of them a few months before, like, they died. So it's not like they were like super sick, but I knew that they had an illness but they were like living with it. Right. So some of us were just impacted very personally from it. So that was one thing, but I'd say most of it, yeah, when you're in New York City and you're surrounded by people who are liberal and Democrats, just like I'm sure if you're in a super red area and you're surrounded by people who are only conservative, like, it's hard for diversity in opinion to get through. It really is. And so I think one of the things that we're really trying to do with this forum is to bring that in, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter if everyone feels like they got the exact right amount of time to speak. Like, we want to try to do that because I think we're living in a time now where our echo chambers are making it really difficult for any of us to truly have diversity of thought inside any particular place. Now, I will say what's really exciting for me to talk to a lot of Maha folks is, and Elizabeth really kind of opened my door. Is that a thing? Open my eyes, sorry. Which is like she opened my door. To just how diverse in opinion Maha is, and how there really are quite divergent opinions. And I think it's really important for other folks who maybe don't understand the movement as well to see that. I think that's important. But I would say it's similar for folks in public health. I'd say that there's quite a bit of diversity of opinion there. There's diversity of opinion about the vaccine schedule. There's, even if most people may feel a certain way about vaccines, there's not necessarily a uniformity in opinion about every single thing involving vaccines, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's partly, and in fact, just a tease, we're going to be getting into some of those interesting debates and things like that in another episode I'm doing, not with a Maha public health thing, but just a conversation I'm moderating. But that's a good tease. Yeah, does that answer your question? I don't even know. It's just fun to be here.
Well, and again, I appreciated that you are platforming Maha in the presence of public health people, particularly because I think that they have lived in some echo chambers, and I don't think that they have had these kinds of conversations and this sort of level of accountability. Like when Travis directly said, this might be hard to hear, but I just don't trust you.
Yeah.
And one of my reflections afterwards was, and of course I come from the frame of Braver Angels, just like Travis, of this parity in reds and blues, but it's also in the moderators. And so that was one of my questions going into it, was when there are 4 hosts or moderators who are all sympathetic to, vaccines are great, or mRNA is the way to go for the future, or whatever, I think it does influence the conversation, even though we're in the room and even though there was one more of us than them. And even though I do feel that you are fair, Brenda, some of the others, like Tom or maybe Dr. Mark, might have asked a question in a particular way that showed his bias. Like, I remember there was a question that was kind of like asking us Maha people to defend a certain kind of spin about Secretary Kennedy. And I remember not wanting to answer because I was protesting the unfairness of the question. Mm-hmm. Was kind of how I felt. Because the subject of the podcast is not about whether we can be trusted, because we are not public health officials. It really, in my mind, was about their trustworthiness. And Kennedy's just coming in our view, to clean it up, to clean up the mess and restore it to gold standard science.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. So a couple of things. One is, so we started this podcast. We had a conversation about like how many hosts and stuff like that. And, 4 is a lot. But the truth is, we were like 4 people who just kind of liked each other, and we had good chemistry, and we all cared about this topic, and we didn't really think, we didn't expect what this podcast has become, quite frankly. So when we started doing it, it was like, we all like each other. Let's just do this thing together. There really was no more thinking than that. I think, having 4 hosts in any show is probably a lot, but we were like, I don't know, let's do it. And I think the way the balance of it is, I mean, you saw like Maggie didn't ask a single question. So even if there were 4 people, it really was mainly Tom and me doing the moderation, and somewhere Mark was there. So I think I just want to remind us that it wasn't really 4 of us all talking at once. That's one thing. It's interesting. I can totally see where you're coming from. And it's something that I even thought about in the very beginning of the show, that like, do we need someone from Maha to be like an official co-host, or someone from MAGA, or somebody, right? And the truth is, like, for us, and I mean like way back when we were first thinking about the podcast, the truth is, we did meet organically. There really was, like, I've known Tom for 30 years. I've known Mark for 20 years. Maggie found me like a year and a half ago. It's not like we were like, I don't know, like Backstreet Boys being put together by producers. You know what I mean? Like, we were just 4 friends who liked each other, and we were like, let's do this thing. And so that's that. But what I will say, Tracy, is I think one of the things I am really trying to do is both be fair, but also be true to my own sense of, where I think a particular fact leads me, so that even if you don't think that's necessarily true, it's my sense of integrity and my sense of how I'm interpreting something, right? So what I would hate it if everyone felt like we are 4 people who are like carrying the water for public health every single time, because I don't know that I see myself or feel that in what I do. I mean, I'm quite critical of them. If you listen to some of our old episodes, I don't know that they necessarily, like, I think Maha is one of the most talented mobilizers and organizers of like ever. I think that public health, there's a lot of people I've met who, especially in the nutrition space, who I think are doing some really interesting work and are following the science. And you guys have actually met a bunch of them, are talking to some of them offline. Like, I think I'm at a point now where, sure, we can litigate this person, that person, but like, I'm really troubled by how divided. I think for me, while those divisions may lead to one group feeling really emboldened, I'd like to see if there's like a third way where there's like things that all of us kind of care about, and can we work through or talk about the things that we feel really differently about, and try to maybe, because I don't know that we can, even the Maha movement can do this on their own. Like, I think it's requiring even a bigger coalition than Maha, if you can believe it or not, because the problems are so big. No one group can really solve it. I don't think public health could have solved it on their own. I don't think Maha can solve it on their own. I don't think MAGA can solve it on their own. I think this is like an all of humanity moment, and call it like naive of me to say that, but I think that's the space where I'm in, where I'm trying to see, can we look past certain things that really keep us apart and talk about those things, and see, maybe we won't agree on some of them, and maybe it's too difficult on some of them. But there's other things, and Elizabeth and I have worked on this together, but there's other things where we're like, all right, well, let's maybe put these things aside for a second. We really disagree on this, but oh my gosh, we just found something we agree on, and you have good data, and you also have like really interesting connections on the ground. And can we kind of come together to do something? And I'm really interested in that. I don't know. This might be it may never work, but that's, sometimes I think about that.
Yeah, and I would agree that the relationships that can be built across the ideological lines can be so valuable to the things that most of us care about. I think I'm so proud of the movement for expanding the the thinking about nutrition and regenerative agriculture and whole foods and pesticides, just, you know, beyond this traditionally liberal bubble. One of my favorite moments, I would say of this year with Maha was attending this event put on, you know, it's a pretty conservative Maha leaning event called Faith, Freedom, and Maha. And I'm seeing these guys in MAGA hats, open carrying, you know, their pistols, talking about how we've got to get the pesticides out of the foods. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, we're in the twilight zone. And so I think it's incredible how the movement has been able to break through so many things that were traditionally liberal into the conservative space, you know. But now that we're there, I think in my experience, even on the conservative side, you know, we still have a lot of pushback from that old school, you know, conservative mentality about things. Like, not everyone who's a Republican is suddenly on board for Maha. In my experience at the state level, you know, that bipartisanship is going to be crucial in accomplishing things, even in a red state like Ohio. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to talk to people who want to show up with good faith and get things done that are important to the movement. And, you know, to Brenda's point, I think we've got a lot more discussions that need to be had around these vaccine issues. Like, it's not something to avoid. And I'm excited to get into that when the time comes.
Awesome. Do you know when the next podcast is going to be? Well, that's a question for Brenda. What's next? Is there something this week or next on another episode?
Yeah, so I'm going to be I'm doing a conversation about agriculture and pesticides and farming. And
Okay.
we're bringing together some folks from Maha, some folks from sort of, I guess, commercial farming, and we're having some interesting conversations. And it's folks that, you know, I've met through you guys, Aaron Martin, John Clark, and then some folks from I guess the agriculture. I don't even know what the groups are, but that's coming next week. And then I'm doing another one with youth, folks under 30, and we're moderating a big conversation with folks who are, you know, who really are inspired by Maha, folks who are, you know, inspired by other things, and just bringing them together. And, you know, sadly, I don't know if any of you guys qualify for the under 30 Zoom, so you may not be getting an invitation on that one.
I know many, though, because, you know, I interviewed a lot of the Kennedy electors. And
Yeah.
so there's quite a few people that I could reach out to if you're needing anyone. And then in regards to your agriculture and pesticide show, I think of Johnny Paradise here as Mr. He likes to talk about glyphosate more than anyone I know.
Oh,
so
well, Johnny, I'll email you. Like, one of the things I'm just toying with are the numbers, because I know it can be tricky having like a huge group. Sometimes I do it just because, believe it or not, I think some people feel like, I've heard from you guys that sometimes you like the group because it like adds like a sense of camaraderie with a group there. So I'm just playing around with different models, but on this one I think we might keep it to 4 or 5 and sort of see where the conversation goes. But I'll definitely email you, Johnny, and either way we should just chat. I'd love to hear your thoughts on stuff.
Cool.
Oh, my mic went. There we go. This is a little meme I made. This is I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Is that American families are getting paid over $10 billion by it says farmers, it should say Americans, from glyphosate specifically. And then you know, this poison's in all of our food. You know, these lawsuits have to do with using like Roundup in our garden. So I think, you know, this us eating this and coming through in breast milk is really a big driver of what we're seeing. And these charts you see here, there's 24+ charts like this where there's just up to like a 99.9% correlation with, the increased use of glyphosate going up with all these conditions, autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, cancers, autoimmune diseases, you name it. So yeah, I we'll see. The Maha report just came out today about strategy addressing our microbiome and our soil health and nutrition. And so glyphosate is big in all of these. Antibiotic killing our soil, disrupting our microbiome, and it chelates nutrients. This is something I just learned about it. Is that just a neighbor getting 1% of their overspray onto your property could tie up to 90% of the nutrients going into the food you're growing. This is crazy. This is one more reason why our food. You got to eat 7 times as many carrots to get the nutrient density you got 40 years ago. So yeah, it's a huge issue, and I think it is the main culprit for our health deficits outside of the recent mRNA technology. So yeah, we'll see what the studies show. Hopefully we got a lot more of those on the way. So
I'm just going to jump in really quick to say I've got to go, but great talk, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, great to see you.
Bye.
Yes.
Ciao.
Yeah. I would just want to say one more kind of conversation rejoinder to that, which was to see the report today that came out and sort of go through some of the goals that are there. Kennedy said it pretty well, which is there are really significant stakeholders all the way across these different these different issues, and they all have something that they need out of it. Like we just live in this world where everybody needs something from somebody else. They need it from government, or they need it from legislation, or they need it from subsidies, or they need it from this, that, or the other thing. And then you have the American people who need maybe something that feels contradictory to even some of those things. So the balancing act that's coming is significant, but I'm just glad that there's something better. Questions are going to be asked. This has been however many years in a row of people just asking the same questions and expecting different results, and some of those things just haven't worked. And so I'm really grateful that these conversations can start to happen. I don't think we're going to solve it overnight. I certainly don't think that we're going to solve it in kind of, I don't know, old Tucker Carlson, Paul Begala fights on Crossfire. It's not going to happen that way, but I think it's going to happen one conversation at a time, and one more kind of chewing into something and letting everybody kind of ruminate with it over the course of a little bit of time, and then coming back to it and asking that same question again. And maybe there's something within all of that can come. And I just don't know. I'm grateful that we have this moment, that even though Trump is really controversial and Kennedy is really controversial, we haven't lived in an America with very many controversial people, short of like sex scandals. So I'm really grateful that we're like talking about things that aren't just about that, or like Bill Clinton Oval Office stuff. We're talking about things that matter, and that's really different in American politics than we've experienced in a long time. So yeah, it's chaotic. There's a lot of controversy around that, but that's maybe an okay thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll just
Hear,
add.
hear.
I'll add that I love that we're having conversations, and after we had our conversation, I dug in a little deeper into the Biotechnology Industrial Organization, the lobbying group that's putting out so much. They're funding people to the tune of $1,000 a post. So when we have these kinds of conversations, I think that they're most valuable if they're genuine and they're organic. And when Brenda and I had a debrief after the podcast, I said, these 3 CDC people are in the middle of a publicity tour on their particular spin on this topic of why they chose to resign and in protest and weaponized against Kennedy. And it feels like a difficult situation for people to be totally real. Also, it's being like it's going to be out in the public, right? So it's another media piece. So I can say that I was genuinely participating. But I was questioning and it seemed like there were some authentic moments, but what I don't know, and I just don't want to be naive, because we are living in an environment of AstroTurf, of fake grassroots, of when I see a post on LinkedIn of a new doctor coming forward to say, I wasn't going to say anything, but now I have to criticize Robert F. Kennedy Jr., my first instinct is, are you being paid? And so with all of the 3 people from the CDC doing now, I think Aaron mentioned something like 17 interviews, there's a sense of funding of a message, funding of a particular, because vaccine manufacturers are a business. They are not, their primary goal is not public health. Their primary goal is making money. And so this leaked bio document, I just put it in the chat. It's called The Plot to Get RFK. And it was published July 1st by James Lyons Weiler at the Brownstone Institute. And then others have published about it. But there was a leaked memo from August 3rd, 2025 from the Vaccine Policy Steering Committee of Bio. And it was literally saying the goal was for the continuity of the vaccine business. And it was this whole PR strategy of how to flood, because really we're in a battle over really who is Kennedy. Is he a good guy or a bad guy, right? It like sort of boils down to. And I think what we're saying is we know him through hundreds of hours of watching him talk, and we feel we know his character and his actions. And Aaron has to go soon, so I'll defer. But anyway, I wanted to bring up that there's this.
I can jump in, Tracy.
Yeah. Sorry.
Can you all hear me? Because my internet, I think, is going a little in and out. Or
yes,
y'all
and
are able to hear me. Yeah.
I was just going to say,
Aaron, if you have to go, do you want to jump in? Yeah.
Oh, I just let you know, like, look, it's a great thing. There's a lot to solve. I mean, I like, to your point, Brenda, I just think there's just a tremendous amount of things that have to get resolved. It's really tough when it gets pinned on people, like we're going to have a lot of people that, like, I really like Kennedy. I really like who he is. I really like what he's standing for. That's going to be pretty controversial to the people that don't like him. And so, but that's tough when you're like, okay, there's this big issue and we've got to try to pin it down on one person to solve the problem. And it's really up to us. I mean, it continues to come back to that. Like, it is up to us, because I'm not sure that people are, what is trustworthy, what isn't. I don't know. It's part of what you're asking in your podcast. It's like, why should I trust you? And I don't know. I don't know. I don't have that answer. I don't know why CDC people should be trusted or why I should be trusted. I don't have any real credibility around anything other than I just talk a lot, write a lot. And some people like that.
Yeah.
Some people don't. So, that's just its own thing. And I wish there was like a point of intersection in which we could all be like, yeah, that I understand and that I agree with, and I'm totally going to change my mind about it. I mean, we just haven't trained ourselves so much. Culture's trained us that way, and media's trained us that way to just like, no, you can't agree on anything, because if you do, it means you're giving away a point. And I don't know. I watch Kennedy, and I watch him sort of have to soldier through some of these conversations and critiques. And I admire it, because I don't think he takes much of it in this sense of like, I think he knows what he wants to do. And maybe he's not totally I don't know, maybe he's not totally trustworthy. I have no idea. But I think over the course of time, you watch him kind of get up and do the same thing and try to do the same thing, and with pretty dramatic consequences to himself. That just adds a little weight of credibility for me. And I think that can happen, but it's not going to happen over. It's not going to happen over single issue things. It's going to happen over the course of a lot of conversations and a lot of different people saying, "Hey, have you thought about it from this perspective?" And that just isn't going to. So I appreciate the chance to talk with these guys. Like I didn't necessarily feel like I came away from that being like, yeah, we got a lot of gotcha points in, or we got a lot of things we wanted to say in. There were lots of things I wanted to say that were when someone would make a point, like, Mo, but that's not how I think about it. But it's okay to like give people their space to have their talk, and then process that, and then try again another day, do it again and again and again. So I don't know. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but I'm appreciative that we at least are starting this, and that's different. That's like this podcast didn't exist in 2016, right? And other things like it didn't exist in 2016 because nobody wanted to talk about this stuff. They were like pissed off at each other all the time, and that's just how we operated. I don't like that guy. He votes for whatever, right? He was an Obama guy, or he was a Trump guy, or what. He liked George W. Bush. I don't know. Just character stuff is when you like assign it, it gets cartoony, and I don't think that's where we're at anymore as Americans. And I'm actually just really glad about that.
Yeah, well, I'm really grateful that I found you guys, and okay. I know you have to go too. I just want to say thank you so much for letting me crash this party. And and if folks are listening, Why Should I Trust You podcast, subscribe, download, listen. You may not agree or even like everything, but that's kind of the point. Let's try different ideas out. And we talked to a lot of folks from Maha, and I really respect everyone that comes on our show. And thank you so much, Johnny.
There we go. All right. 1, 2, 1, 2. Thank you. No, I love what you're doing. Yeah, the dialogue, it's just so important. That's how we come, let's reason together. That's an old proverb that we've got to embody that. So what do you say, Tracy? You got some closing thoughts for us?
Oh, just closing thoughts. I'm grateful that Brenda was watching and could join us. I don't know how many people are watching out there, and grateful that I trust that she can hear my critical thinking, my wanting to be aware of the forces that influence truth telling, and wanting things to be fair. And so I'm grateful I had the chance to be on the podcast, and I keep the questions that I have about the podcast, and I will watch more of the podcasts and be, maybe participate in the future. But Aaron was just saying these things didn't exist before. There's a lot of organizations that exist. Brenda found us through Braver Angels. There's Living Room Conversations. There's many, many dialogue organizations. There's Dinner and a Fight, if you've heard of that organization. So lots of great efforts out there. And anyway, but you're part of that too, Johnny. So thanks for having us on to reflect on how the podcast went and our thoughts on the resignations.
We're drowning in toxicity and deception. We gotta be the change. Let's make our food medicine again, right? Amen.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk again soon.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much.
This is great.
Good to see you, Brenda.
Bye.